hats during their presentation because they understand that it's hat day. But we're going to start our program with the Pledge of Allegiance, and for that, if you take your caps off, please, and stand. Thank you. Guys, listen up. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yesterday after school, I went over to my sister's house because on Wednesday that's her baking day, and she makes these wonderful oatmeal raisin cookies. And when I walked in, my brother-in-law, who's retired from the post office in Rapids, he really enjoys watching the educational channel. We don't have cable where we live, so I have no idea what channel it is. I think channel 20 or something. And it was on World War II. And I sat down and started watching and quickly remembered the speeches that I heard the day before. These men were here on Tuesday, and they met with the 6th and 7th grade. Well, I was watching on television yesterday afternoon what they said on Tuesday, and felt like I was repeating history. I don't know if you've studied World War II yet in your history classes. If you haven't, you will. If you watch Channel 20 yesterday when you study World War II, you don't have to read it today. You have it. These men were there. One of the things that really dawned on me on Tuesday was there wasn't much difference in age between you kids and when they went to war. This man over here who was in a submarine said he was 16. Some of you kids are 14. Maybe we have one or two that are 15. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, students, these four men deserve your respect and attention this morning. The 6th and 7th graders on Tuesday were very respectful, very attentive, and I know you will be the same. They went through hell so we can have the lifestyle today that we do. I got up this morning, stopped and got a donut and a Diet Coke, and came to school. This afternoon, I'll do whatever I want to do after I leave school. This weekend, I'll do whatever I want to do. That's not true in all countries, is it, Mike? All countries, people can't do that because the government tells them what they will do and how they will live their lives. The government determines their jobs. They say, Joel, you will do this. Mary, you will do this. In this country, we decide. We decide our jobs. We decide how we'll live our lives. And you kids are determining that now with your studies. You're determining now how you will live the rest of your life. Not the government, not the dictator, not a king or a queen. You have the option. You have the right. Why? Because of heroes like the four men that are standing or sitting behind me. You don't have to read in Mr. Thomas Guard's history books this afternoon about World War II. You're going to hear it this morning from grandpas, and maybe some of you know them as grandpa or as a great uncle. But what really hit me on Tuesday is they were not much older than you when they were at war. So, gentlemen, this is Mr. Brost, Arnie Brost. This is Mr. Alan Brost. This is Mr. Rusch. And this is Dr. Thompson. And as I heard Dr. Thompson say a couple weeks ago at a meeting, I probably delivered you. He probably delivered many of you that are here this morning.
Yeah, good morning, boys and girls and teachers. How are you this morning?
Good.
Good. I'm Arnie Brost, and I'm commander of the Nekoosa post of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And we're here to tell you a little bit about World War II and the VFW. This year is the 100th anniversary of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. They were founded in 1899 by veterans from the Spanish-American War and the Philippine Insurrection, or the Philippine War. Little did they realize the organization they founded would still be here 100 years later, with a membership of men and women from 6 major wars and numerous minor engagements. In 1999, the membership stands at over 2,167,000. We are proud to be members of the VFW. This indicates that we have served our country at time of war in a foreign land. But we are also proud of the things the VFW has done and what the post does locally. Nationally, the VFW is a driving force on many programs that benefit veterans. One of the most notable ones was the GI Bill of Rights, which provided that veterans would retain their jobs when they returned from World War II, and provided for 8 million veterans a college education. All the services today have educational programs. And I think probably, I feel it is the result of the GI Bill and the people following us in the service wanting to get an education and it had to be. The VFW also made efforts for county veteran service officers. Now I think there's a service officer in every county that provides services to all service people and helps them to get their benefits they're entitled to under the laws. Locally, we do military funerals when requested. We hold Memorial Day programs at the Nekoosa, the Port Edwards, and the New Rome cemeteries. And we hold a program each year in the fall to remind the public that there are still men and women missing in action and still being held as prisoners of war. We do this at Howland, been doing it, I should say, at Howland Field before a football game. So some of you may have seen us there. Financially, we supported the new library, the ambulance and fire departments, the Boy Scouts. We give a good citizenship award for graduating seniors from both the Nekoosa High School and the Port Edwards High School. And we have many projects affecting or doing things for hospitalized veterans. Some of these veterans are in the hospitals for life. So they need a lot of little things, and we're proud of the fact that we're part of doing these things for them. Right now we'll tell you or share with you some of our experiences in World War II. United States entered World War II on December 7th when the Japanese attacked our naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Alan was there, and he flew in a dive bomber off the carrier Enterprise. And he'll tell you something about this. This is our advent into the war.
My name is Arnie Brost, and I'll give you a rundown on what happened before, during, and after the Japanese attack in Pearl Harbor on December 7th. Pearl Harbor is located on Oahu Island in the Hawaiian chain. I joined the Navy in 1940, and upon completion of boot camp, I went aboard the Enterprise in December 1940. When I got aboard, I was surprised to see the kind of planes they had on it. They were old biplanes. They looked like World War I vintage. But in April of 1941, we got all new planes, new SPD dive bombers. Here's picture one here, diving on a Jap carrier. You can see.
This is the airplane he was on.
And after getting checked out on them for a month, in May we left for Pearl Harbor. We were supposed to stay there till 1st of September and come back to the States. We were on maneuvers all summer. But when September 1st came around, the negotiations in Washington, D.C. with the Japanese were going kind of bad. So they canceled our orders. We were to stay in Pearl Harbor till January 1st. But when November 1st came around, the negotiations were really bad. We knew something was going to happen somewhere. We didn't know where, when. So 1st November, we started operating under wartime conditions. That meant getting up at 3:30 in the morning and ready for a flight at 6 o'clock. Every morning, we'd have 10 planes. They would take off and fly submarine patrol. They'd go in different sectors, go out 200 miles and return. We'd look for any Jap fleet that may be in our territorial waters. And we do the same thing in the afternoon. We rotate. And we were back in Pearl Harbor about the 20th of November, and the Hornet was there. It was a sister ship to the Enterprise. It had a load of Marine, or squadron of Marine fire planes and their pilots. They were taking them to Wake Island, and we were to escort them there. We got them there and started back to Pearl Harbor. It was December 3rd, and on the 4th, December 4th, at night we run into an awful storm. We'd been making 20 knots, and we were supposed to be in Pearl Harbor on Saturday, December 6th. But the storm lasted 2 days, and during it, one of our destroyer escorts split a seam, was taking on water. So we had to slow up to 10 knots to wait for it. That meant we wouldn't get into Pearl Harbor until Sunday, which was a godsend. Anyway, it was so rough that we had to tie all the planes down to the flight deck, keep them from sliding over the side. We couldn't do any flying. So Sunday morning on December 7th, we were up at 3:30 and we were out of the storm. The sky was nice and blue and the water was calm, just a beautiful day. And the flight plan was out, but my pilot and I weren't on it because our plane was down for maintenance check. So I was up in the flight deck. We were on standby. I was up in the flight deck and had my flight gear on, watching planes take off. Got down to the last 2 planes, and there was nobody in them. My pilot came out of the ready room and says, "Come on, we're going." So we jumped in and took off. And we were in there about a half hour. Everything was beautiful, a nice day. And I don't know why he told me this, but he never did before. He says, tune the radio into the Honolulu radio station. We'll listen to some music on the way in. So we were enjoying the music for about 15 minutes. Pretty soon the announcer broke in. He says, I didn't know the Army was holding maneuvers this morning. He says, boy, it sure looked real. About that time, the Jap plane, or the plane flew past the radio station, and he seen the big rising sun under the wing. He said, we're being attacked by Japanese aircraft. And he went on to tell all about the explosions and fires over the Hickam Field, the Army Field, and about smoke and explosions down Pearl Harbor. And this went on for 15, 20 minutes. Then he says, looks like it's all over. The planes are leaving. So he kept talking about it, telling all about it. And about 15 minutes later, he says, here they come again, it's starting all over. By that time, we were close enough where we could see the smoke coming from Pearl Harbor. So the time we got up to the channel to fly up to Pearl Harbor, you could see the jet planes ahead strafing, bombing. I had my machine gun out. I was the only one that did, I guess. I don't think anybody else knew what was going on. And I asked the pilot if the plane taxes, if I should return the fire. He says no, because war hasn't been declared. I already had my mind made up what I was going to do. Anyway, we got up a little further, and I looked over to Hickam Field. It was off to my right. Everybody was running around, looked like a bunch of ants running around there. It was regular chaos. And all the planes on the field were burning, and all the buildings that had bombed, and the roofs were just laid out like that, hanging over the sides and the wall. My first thought was, looked like a bunch of empty sardine cans. So we went up a little further towards Pearl Harbor. We had to fly just about over the ships to get to the field. And Arizona was laying on its side, burning, smoking, all the rest of it sinking. Looked down the water, it was full of bodies and body parts. Anyway, we managed to land. All the ground crews were firing at us, and a couple bullets hit the plane, but not enough to hurt it. We managed to land between the bomb craters and the burning planes at the field, and we gassed up and went out looking for them, but we couldn't find them. We come back, got more gas, went out again, and still couldn't find them. So Sunday night, we slept in the hangars till we were close to the planes. About 8 o'clock, every gun on the island started firing. We thought, sure, the Japs had came back, but it turned out to be 6 of our fighter planes from the Enterprise were out scouting that day, and it was dark, and they returned, and they wouldn't turn the landing lights on so they could land, because they were afraid of the Jap submarine being around. They told them to go into Pearl Harbor and land. So the communications weren't very good. They came up the channel and everybody started shooting at them. They shot 5 down, killed 4 pilots. 1 bailed out, and one plane made it into the field. So about 11 o'clock, the same thing happened. And it turned out to be a bunch of B-17 bombers coming in from the States. They shot them full of holes, but they all managed to land. The next day, we went out scouting some more. Couldn't find anything. Monday night, the Enterprise came in Pearl Harbor after dark. They were out of fuel, and when you're out of gas, we refueled and took on supplies, worked all night. And Tuesday morning, it took off before daylight, and we flew out till then. And from then on, for a couple months, we went up and down the Pacific Ocean from Midway down to the equator, back and forth, and tacked in all the Chapter Islands that we got close to. And in February, we were over Marshall and Wilbur Islands. We went out in the morning, 40 planes attacked that, came back, and afternoon they wanted to send 7 more. So our plane was the last one in formation. We were up at 13,000 feet over the island, picking out a target. And 6 planes ahead of us were already in their dive, just like that one. And we were looking for a target, and when I spotted 3 Japanese fighter planes coming after us. And I called the pilot and told him I thought he'd put it in dive and get out of there. Instead, he slowed up as slow as he could and let him come. And I thought he's got a lot of confidence in my shooting him. So when I seen him coming, I said to myself, come on, you SOBs, it's either going to be you or me. I'm going to make damn sure it isn't me. So they came in. I shot 4 shots at the first one, and my gun jammed. So now, in order to clear it, I had to stand up in the cockpit. The canopy was open. I had opened up the top of the gun, and they were only 150 yards out. And I thought if I did that, they'd see what I had trouble with the gun, come in and shoot us down. So I stayed behind the gun, and they'd leave us to go firing at them. That seemed to work because they pulled out and went around again. At that time, I had the gun clear, and they came back. I got 3 shots off that time, and I flew out of my seat. And I was hanging by when I come to, I was hanging by my seat belt. I looked up over the side of the cockpit, and the 3rd plane was just going by. And I tried to get back up in the seat. I couldn't raise my left arm up. I looked down, the blood was running down my hand. And I finally managed to get back up in the seat. I could only use one hand to shoot the machine gun, but it came around again, and I missed the first one, but I hit the second one. He started down to one side of us, and I shot a couple shots at the 3rd one. He was going by, so I turned around and finished off that second one that I shot. At that time, they were coming around again, and I hit the second one. He went down underneath us. I didn't know how bad he was hit, and one of the tricks was to fly underneath you and come up, shoot you from the bottom. So I called the pilot, and I says, when I couldn't see him, he went by the wing. I called the pilot, and I said, nose it over, he's underneath it. So he tipped it over and shot 4 times and pulled out. And at that time, the 3rd one was coming around again. I hit him, and I guess he even just like that, he turned around and looked up the way. I don't know if he ever made it back to the base or not. But he kept attacking the island out there. And in the middle of May, we broke the Japanese code and found out they were going to attack Midway Island on the 4th of June. So the Enterprise and Yorktown, another sister ship to the Enterprise, we got around the northeast side of the island, and we had scout planes out looking for the Jap fleet, and they had a hard time finding them. But the Enterprise had launched their planes at 6 o'clock in the morning and were circling the ship, waiting for a report where the Japanese carriers were. And at 8 o'clock it came. At that time they burned up 2 hours of gas. They wanted to land and top off their tanks, but they wouldn't let them because they thought by the time they land, the Japs would find us and bomb the ship with all the planes on. So when they found the carriers. They were about 200 miles west. They flew over there. A lot of them knew they didn't have enough gas to get back. But they sank 3 carriers. There was 4 altogether. They sank 3 carriers that day. And the next day, they went out and sank the 4th one. And in the meantime, the Japs had found our ship. They sank the Yorktown, but they didn't hit the Enterprise. And we lost a lot of pilots there in planes. My pilot, and I wasn't with him because I just had to go to the hospital with my arm. And the guy that took my place, they were missing in action, both of them. So if I'd have been there, I wouldn't be here today. I think that was the turning point in the war, Battle of Midway. The Japs would have won that. They'd probably be speaking Japanese now. But, 2 operations, 11 months later, I got out of the hospital, and my hand was still crippled. I could straighten my fingers out to go right back. So that was the end of my overseas duty. And I got out of the Navy in 1945, and that's about it, I guess. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
You have questions for Mr. Brook?
Oh, here's one thing I wanted to show you. Did any of you ever hear about kamikaze pilots? They were young guys, 18, 19, that they kind of drugged them and brainwashed them, taught them how to fly a plane. They taught them how to fly, but take off and not how to land. They were supposed to go out with a load of bombs and die and smash their planes into a ship and sink them. One hit the Enterprise. So you can see it, just hit the Enterprise right there, went through the flight deck, and went off on the hangar deck, and blew up our bomb compartment and the gasoline storage tank, and it blew the elevator 400 feet in the air, that big elevator. You see the hole there. We had a lot of those during the war. Another thing, none of the Japanese pilots or air crews, none of them wear parachutes. They never had any. They got their plane hit. They were supposed to go down with the plane. That's about it, I guess.
Thank you, Alan. Alan didn't mention, but the time he got wounded, there were 29 bullet holes through their plane and 28 going out. So we know where the one went. I'm going to tell you about submarines and what it's like to be on one. But in the submarine service, I guess they should see why they call it the silent service and the quiet service or secret service. You don't have exciting things to say like Alan and some of the other speakers may have. Man thought about sailing under the water clear back in the 16th century, but there were 2 big obstacles they had to overcome. The means to propel a submarine underwater and to provide breathable air for the crew. These things were solved in the early 1900s when man discovered how to make large, dependable storage batteries, filters to screen out the impurities in the air, carried oxygen, and efficient diesel engines. These submarines were called diesel electrics and were used until the nuclear subs came into being in the 1950s. There's one thing about all the subs in World War II had in common. They all had to surface each night to charge the batteries. In early 1943, I was a young 16-year-old and very much afraid the war would end before I could get to it. So I fibbed just a little bit and was able to go to the Navy boot camp at Farragut, Idaho. And from there I went aboard a PC-777 patrolling for jet subs along the California coast and around Catalina Island. And I thought the fastest way to get into the real war was to volunteer for sub-duty, because if you volunteered for sub-duty and you passed the physical and the other tests, you were usually transferred right out. So that's what I did. I found out afterwards, very few of the sub-crews get to see any of the action. But you hear it, you feel it, and many times you fear it. In World War II, there are two main classes of submarines. The S-class, which was developed in the 1920s, and the skipjack and other improved versions of the skipjack class that came out in the late 30s and early 40s. The S-class subs are 219 feet long, could submerge to 200 feet. They travel about 8 or 9 miles per hour underwater, which I'm sure many of you guys and girls can ride your bikes faster than that. And on the surface, they could go about to 14 miles an hour. And they could carry food and fuel to last 30 to 35 days. That's what determined how far and stuff the sub could range. The skipjack and the similar subs were about 330 feet long, and they could submerge from 400 to 600 feet. And they traveled 12 to 14 miles an hour underwater and about 16 to 20 miles on the surface. And they carried fuel and food to last 40 to 50 days at sea. The submarine force in World War II was less than 2% of the Navy, but they sank 65% of Japan's merchant fleet and 37% of their warships. And we lost 52 subs in World War II. In most cases, the crew was lost with them. Just a little bit on water pressure. At periscope depth, the water pressure is about 25 pounds per square inch. At 100 feet, it was 88 pounds per square inch, and over 200 pounds at 200 feet. So there's immense force pushing. I meant square inches, not square feet. So there's an immense force pushing on the hulls of these submarines. If a sub could take a fairly close hit if the depth charge went off above it, because the force, the bigger force of the charge followed the course of least resistance, which was up. If the depth charge went off below you or alongside of you, it was pretty serious. When World War II broke out, they sent 8 of the S-class subs to the Aleutian Islands. And the Aleutian Islands are string islands running from the tip of Alaska toward Japan, and an arc toward Japan. And I thought the North Pacific had some of the roughest weather and the roughest seas in the Pacific. After Alan talked about it, their 3-day excursion with the storm around Hawaii, maybe I was wrong. But we had one sub, usually our further south coast was Attu, the island of Attu, and our main base was at Dutch Harbor, about halfway down the Aleutian chain. So usually it's a 3-day run to go from Attu to Dutch Harbor or vice versa. And we had what they call willy-wads hit. And they were wind from 60, 70 to 100 miles an hour. And it took that one sub 9 days to make that trip. They'd make some headway when they submerged, but then when they had to come up, charge the batteries, they lost a lot of it. So some of the weather was pretty bad. The Aleutian Islands, and that was the shortest route to the Kuril Islands, to the northern coast, and the Sea of Japan. And their assignment there was to stop the flow of materials coming from Manchuria and Korea and going to Japan. I'm going to tell you about life on one of the S-class boats. This is an old one, commissioned in 1926. specifically the USS Talon, better known to the crew as the S-30. She carried a crew of 48 men and 4 officers. And the men and officers all got to be a pretty close-knit group on a submarine. Everyone was dependent on the other person to do their job. And so you got to be a pretty close group. Compared to a battleship, I think a battleship carried a crew of about 3,000. And most of the sailors on them only knew 30, 40 people that they were around every day. So that, I suppose, added to why a subcrew got to be a pretty close-knit group. Life aboard the S-boats was not quite as glamorous as the movies may have portrayed it. There was no room to exercise in. The first few days at sea, we ate good. We had fresh meat, fresh potatoes, vegetables, fruits. But we had no way for long-term storage. So after that, it was dehydrated potatoes, dehydrated cabbage, canned vegetables, powdered eggs, powdered milk, and Spam. We had Spam in about every conceivable way you can think of. It was fried up with our chipped up into gravy for go on over biscuits, and it was fried, and it was used raw or out of the can. But we had Spam. There's one thing we did have, and that was coffee. In the Navy, they called coffee Joe. So when you had a cup of coffee, you had a cup of Joe. But there's one good thing about sub pay. For submarine duty, I should have said the pay was doubled. Mine went from $62.50 a month to $125 a month. People make that in a day now. The layout of an S-boat from the bow to the stern was the first one on the bow was the torpedo room, where the torpedo tubes were. And we carried 12 spare torpedoes. And the crew, the torpedo men's bunks were swung in around the spare torpedoes. Then they had the after battery, the control room, which housed the officers' quarters and the access to the conning tower. Then the after battery, where the galley and the crew's restroom was. In the Navy, they called it the head, by the way. I don't know why, but they did. And then you had the engine room where I was as a diesel mechanic, and then the last one in the stern was the motor room where electric motors and generators were located. And there's a watertight door between each compartment. And when you were at general quarters, these doors were sealed. So you were kind of locked into your compartment until the action cleared. Most of the crew's bunks were in the 2 battery rooms. And there were not quite enough bunks to go around. So some of us, when we were on duty, a buddy used the bunk, and when he was on duty, you used it. But you learn to live with that. Water on a submarine was a very scarce item. The water was distilled from seawater in an electric still. And the highest priority for that water was for the batteries. The batteries got it first. Then you got drinking water and sufficient water if you had it for cooking meals. And then you got, each man got a wash basin of water a day to wash up in. And if you're lucky, in 30, 35 days at sea, we all had to take our turns at showers. And if you were lucky, we got 3 showers in those 30 days. So it wasn't quite as nice as, and there's no laundering done on it. You couldn't launder anything. And there was not much storage room aboard this stuff. Our dress uniforms and stuff were stored at the base at Dutch Harbor. Then we took about 4 pairs of jeans in the Navy, they called them dungarees, and shirts, and then underclothes, towel, washcloths, and your toiletries, toothbrush, and stuff like that. And to make room for your clothes, the Navy, all your clothes were rolled and tied. And when you got good at it, you could, when you unrolled them, they almost looked as though they were pressed. I have here a pair of trousers, a shirt, and a fairly large bath towel. But that's the way we had to travel. Recreation aboard a sub was kind of simple. We gathered up all the magazines when you was on base and anything you could read, and we read them. We got to know them by heart in 30 days. Then we studied for advancement in rank, just about like you're studying to get from this grade into the 9th grade or high school. About the same thing. Then we played cards, a lot of cards. And when the radio was free, that'd be the ship's radio, we'd listen to stateside music and news. Almost every night we would hear the Japanese propaganda station come on with Tokyo Rose. Tokyo Rose was a Japanese American who was in Japan when the war started. And they kept her there and they induced her to broadcast propaganda to the servicemen in the Pacific. When we surfed it that night, one of the first things we did was dump the day's garbage, and everyone was encouraged to use the toilet. We wanted to be as far away from anything that floated as we could by morning, because we didn't want to let the enemy know there's a sub lurking in the area. And the toilet room on a sub is much different and much different than the one you have at home. It's a small cubicle. One person can go in at a time. And when you open the door, there's a funny looking stool. And there's an array of pipes and valves, pressure gauges. And there's a high pressure valve, pressure gauge, and a lever, geared lever valve, so it opened easy and a quarter of a turn opened it. And this was a 3-inch line that went directly to the sea. Then over on this other side, you got a high pressure air line. Then you got an air tank and a pressure gauge and another quick opening valve. So when you're ready to flush the waste tank, you open up the seawater valve and you see the pressure. If you're 100 feet, it's 88 pounds per square inch. That's a lot of pressure, especially when your garden hoses are about 30 pounds. And so you have to open the air valve and charge the air tank to about 130 pounds because you have to overcome that 80 pounds of pressure. So you do that, and you go and you get a hand on each one of these lever valves, and you pull, and poof, it's ejected to sea. But if you don't pull them together right with all that pressure, that stuff has to go somewhere. And it was designed to come back and spray all over the restroom. When that happened, the guy got an extra shower. But he also had to clean the restroom. I'm just going to touch a little bit on nuclear subs. We have two main types of nuclear subs. The missile subs are around 600 feet long and over 80 feet in diameter. We could stick 3 of the kind we had up in the Aleutians inside of one of those. And the other is an attack type sub that's smaller, and their job is to go out and search out enemy missile subs and sink them. These subs can dive to, Navy acknowledges 1,500 feet, and we think most of them can go to 3,000, which the hulls are made of titanium, one of the hardest metals. And they can travel, submerged, 50 miles an hour compared to the speed that they did in World War II. And they have instruments we never dream of. They still use a newer brand of torpedo in the attack subs, because that underwater like that, they have to use torpedoes to seek out the enemy subs. And the torpedo travels about 35, 40 miles an hour. So these nuclear subs can turn and outrun them if they have to. But the instruments they have, they know exactly where with the one's been fired and what direction it's coming and how fast and how far away it is. We never rented those kind of instruments. There's 2 full crews on each nuclear sub. When they leave the harbor, they submerge and they don't surface again until they come back. And usually a minimum patrol for a nuclear sub is 90 days. Some of them have been gone for 6 months. And when they come back, the extra crew goes aboard, cleans the sub up, resupplies it, and then they go. And the crew that just came off get a little leave. They can see their friends, wives, relatives. Then they're back for a couple of months because the training is continuous for them. But when they're aboard, they have all the water they need. They have freezers, exercise rooms. Some of them even have swimming pools. And they got VCRs where they can have quite a selection of movies and stuff. But they need this stuff. A man can't, or people can't be out for 90 days and do nothing. Your muscles would get so bad, and it affects your ability to perform your job and stuff. So anyway, the nuclear subs of today are much different than the ones in World War II. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask?
There's one back over there.
Okay.
What was the biggest room in the subs?
The biggest room in the sub that you were in?
I think the after battery is the biggest room because it housed the galley and a lot of bunks in the men's restroom.
Might think the captain have a big room too, so.
Did the captain have a bigger room?
Well, the 4 officers had room for by themselves, and they had a little better bunks, but then they were officers. The officers on the submarine were generally, they dressed with the crew and everything, but everyone knew who they were. And so you treated them with the respect you had to treat an officer, but it wasn't quite like on other ships. They got to be pretty friendly with people.
Any other questions? My sons and I go up to Alaska fishing in the summertime. And last year we went to the Aleutian Islands where the submarine base was. Dutch Harbor, Alaska. It's Dutch Harbor, Alaska and Unalaska, just like Adam's Friendship. There are 2 little towns, but up there they're separated by a river or a creek. And I don't know if he talked about the pillboxes, but the pillboxes to protect that harbor are still there. There may be, the size of this area right here, and the concrete must be, about 2 feet thick. And then there are slots cut in those pillboxes where, of course, they could shoot out. The back side, the land side of the pillbox, there was a bigger hole so you could crawl in. And there are lots of them there in the harbor, but the things that we noticed the most was once you get out on the channel, it's a natural harbor. It's one of the few natural harbors in the world. It's very deep with these, I don't know, peninsulas or, yeah, I would guess peninsulas jutting out in all directions. But out on the highest points, they would have pillboxes, and we marveled at how those soldiers in those days would get up to them. I mean, they were extremely steep. We walked up to one, and it took me a long time to get up there. And once we got up there, there was a great big ring where they mounted the guns that could shoot out into the harbor. It was just amazing how they got that stuff up there. I mean, those guys were surely in better shape than I am. But on Alaska, when you come into town, when you're out in the ocean, when you come into town, on the ridges, you could see an outline. I don't know, Mr. Brost, if you ever saw this, but you could see an outline of a city. But what they did, because in those days the kind of planes they had, they would come in really low to shoot. Well, they tried to confuse the pilots. On the ridge, they dug in the ground an outline of a city. Like it would look like this, you know, a flat building, and then it would go up and over and down and over. And you could still see that, you know, 50, 55 years later. Interesting. But I had no idea that's where you were stationed. A friend of mine who just passed away and was grandpa of a 7th grader here, Greg Thibodeau. He was stationed on Alaska or Dutch Harbor, and I didn't know that until
across the little bay.
he passed away.
When we was there.
Yeah. And you know, they all those barracks, they told us there were 60,000 soldiers there. Just recently, they tore all those barracks down. You can still see the cement slabs, but the buildings are gone.
Are there any trees there? There wasn't any when we were there.
Any what?
Any trees?
Oh, no,
No.
except trees that they planted,
Yeah.
just a few trees.
I just might mention too that the Aleutian Islands, well, you got Kodiak, Dutch Harbor, Adak, Kiska, and that too. Several times there's more than one island, but Kiska and that too were taken by the Japanese early in the war. And the Americans built a big army base and stuff on the airfield on the island of Adak. So they were bombing our own islands of Kiska and that too. And in late 42, they invaded Attu, bypassed Kiska, and took Attu back. But then they were planning an invasion. In fact, they had grouped the invasion fleet to take the island of Kiska back. And then they got delayed for a week. There was a heavy fog and stuff. And then when it cleared, they set out, and in that week of the heavy fog, the Japanese abandoned Kiska, lock, stock, and barrel. But while they were there, they bombed Adak, and they bombed Dutch Harbor too. Well, that's all for me. Wilbur was in June. Wilbur made the landings in Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944. That's the big invasion. And I'll leave him tell you about that.
Students, I don't know if he'll mention it or not, but after the war, or towards the end of the war, the French government presented 14, well, they presented lots of medals, but this one particular medal, they presented 14 of them, and this man right here received one of them. So there are only 13 other soldiers out there that have received the same award that
From our unit.
from your unit. Still a tremendous honor, sir.
Okay, you heard the Pacific version. I will go to the Atlantic. D-Day, well, we started right after high school. There were no jobs, really, so we went to see what we could enlist in. Well, we have a friend that's in the Merchant Marine. We ended up with another one that went into the Navy. So I'm going to go with the Navy. So I get down there and they say, submarine duty. You saw how tall Mr. Brost is. I'm a little bit taller. Out. So I ended up in the Army. Down in Fort, or Camp Rucker at the time, in Alabama. I'm originally from Wausau. We left there it was 28, 30 degrees below zero. Okay. We get down to Fort Sheridan down in Illinois. It warmed up, it was 10. We got all our uniforms. At that time, winter underwear was double-breasted, back and front. You end up down there in Alabama, it happened to be 68 degrees, and it's red clay, and it's hot. We lost a few pounds at that episode. We went into the hills of Tennessee for our maneuvers, learning. As Mr. Brost pointed out, they got ships. We had broom handles, and we had little bags with flour representing a hand grenade. In the maneuvers, it was a red against the green. So 1 week you're one color, and then we were back and forth playing cop and robber in there. The captain comes up with a jeep. I'm standing there. What am I going to do? So I took my imitation hand grenade and I threw it. It hit the top of the windshield. I splattered him all with flour. You're captured. I said, well, possibly you're right, sir, but I beg to differ. I hit you with this. You didn't see me when I hit you, so you can't capture us. At that time, we ended up in April, and then shortly after Labor Day, we went overseas. We went into England, and that's the first time we saw a gun, which is now the carbine that we had. And we're playing maneuvers again until we were supposed to make the invasion of, or landing in Africa. We missed that by a week, I understood. We were to make the landing over in Sicily. We missed that. We had the good fortune of making Omaha Beach in France. Now, here is what it looked like. The German army behind the various areas were on maneuvers. Good thing. After the United States knocked General Rommel out of Africa, his wife were celebrating a birthday and a wedding anniversary. So he's gone. Everybody doesn't know what's happening, but we were well attacked. To our right or left at that time was the Utah Beach. We were on Omaha Beach. The Canadians and the English were to our other side. Everybody had to have a goal, okay. That we were supposed to be able to make the next village. The English had to capture Bayeux. We heard all about it. They were in Bayeux sometime in the afternoon. Supposedly the war was supposed to start at 6 o'clock. Well, I happened to be there before 6 o'clock. I have no idea how. Our ship was outside, 10 miles out, and we go in on a small landing craft. As we get there, they drop the end, and there were 14 of us, and we stepped off in water. I'm up here. Our ammunition carrier, he was, I'm not going to say, he was about Arnie Brost. He went over his head. I said, give me that thing. And I'm holding my gun in there, and we get in. And it was very hot, I'll tell you. We saw, well, the statistics, there were 2,500 people killed, wounded, or missing from just our area. It was not, there were 2 German pillboxes up on each side. Luckily, the one was knocked out, and as the gentleman said, the pillboxes are still up in Alaska. They still are there, I understand. The one on the left kept firing. And if you can mow grass with a machine gun, you know, we were lucky. It was all personnel mines, and if somebody got hit, don't step off of here, step on me, because the personnel mine would blow their leg off or what, however it got hit, and there were wounded laying. We could make the second part, and an officer fell on top of me. I had no idea who the heck he was. Finally, I said, I'm getting out of here. I rolled him off. He happened to be the one that was wounded. He looked at me. He was dead. I didn't know that. It was very traumatic, to say the least. But we moved up at 10 o'clock that night. They were saying, what are we going to do? The Rangers had hit Utah Beach, and it was a sheer cliff. They got up and on the ropes. We got up to the top of the hill, which is now the cemetery, and President Teddy Roosevelt's son is lying in that cemetery. To this day, if anybody says that he was in the 116th Regiment of the 1st Division, I'll buy him the best drink in the house. Because they had more guts than we did. And I'll tell you, it was not that. We got moved up, and then finally the rumors fly, you're being held back. Why? You're going over to Japan. Thank God President Truman developed the A-bomb and dropped it. Otherwise, I don't know if we made another one. My luck ran out good, and I didn't want it to run out. After a while, on our way home, we got transferred to the 353rd Infantry of the 89th Division. This is November. We had spent 2 Christmases overseas. We had no idea what was going to happen. Hey, we're going home. Anytime you had months and you had whatever medals qualified you, and you had to have so many points, and you're on your way home. So the 20th of November, we were transferred in, and we were going home. Thank God, we're going to make it. The day the war was over in Europe, I'm standing up in we were in a warehouse, and I'm standing up there. I had no idea what was happening. The radio was on. The people across the road, which happened to be a black outfit, started shooting. Hey, we were going home. If I had stayed there one more minute or one more second, I wouldn't have made it home. We got knocked off of one boat. We got knocked off of the second boat. Thank God we're going to make it home for Christmas. We're going to be on the aircraft carrier Wasp. We loaded up, unfortunately, on the 25th of December. We ain't going to make it home. but we're going home. We get out 1,480 miles away, there's New York. All of a sudden, as they were saying, it's rough in the North Pacific, it's North Atlantic is worse. Submarine, you can go down and you can go through. But here on an aircraft carrier, you're sitting up there. At 6 o'clock, I opened up a hatch. After a while, I asked the Navy, I said, how hard, where's this 60 foot down? And when water is coming at you, you better close that hatch quick. We were in there, and it was New Year's Eve. The flight deck of an aircraft carrier sticks out over the ship. All of a sudden, what happened? The flight deck buckled, came right down. We were going home at 30 knots an hour. We were going to make it home in plenty of time until that happened. It was all chaos. We thought the war was bad. This is peace now. What's happening? And after a while, the next morning, we had the football game. You had the Super Bowl. Okay, we had the Wasp Bowl. It was just as smooth as this floor. We finally made it home in 1946. That's my story.
Thank you, Wilbur. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask Wilbur? Okay, we'll now present you with Dr. Thompson. Doc was in the Air Force and shot down and held as prisoner of war. So he might have an interesting story also.
In 1942, I was 17 years of age, and I had to wait till I became 18 in order to join the aviation cadet program of the Air Force. I received excellent training, and a year and a half later, I graduated as an officer and pilot in the Air Force. Went to fighter school, and in 1944, I was sent to Europe, where I joined the 86th Fighter Group in Italy. You can see the two pictures on each side. The airplane that I flew was called a Thunderbolt P-47. The mission of the 86th Fighter Group was included several different things. They had come up through North Africa in the invasion. They had come into the invasion of Sicily, and they were in Anzio in the invasion of Italy. I joined them, though, as a young man after the pilots would get rotated back. And the missions were to interrupt all the supplies that came out of Germany. Germany was a munitions factory, and supplying the armies that were fighting in Sicily and Italy. These were both the American and British Army. And we interrupted the supplies by dive bombing and strafing, destroying everything that moved on the ground, including such things as trains, cars, trucks, barges, ships. We destroyed every bridge that we could find in northern Italy. The Germans were very good at rebuilding them. The latter part of December 1944, our mission for that morning was to destroy a reconstructed bridge over the Po River in northern Italy. 6 of our airplanes went in. I was in number 6 position. And that was usually the bad position to go on dive bombing because the hornet's nest is stirred up and the shooting sometimes becomes intense. I was hit on the end of the bomb run, and the airplane started burning. And when the oil came into the cockpit and ignited, realized that I had to get out of there as quick as possible because my jacket started burning. I looked down and, like Mr. Brost, that I also was bleeding from a wound in my face and my chin. Fortunately, I was able to get out of the airplane and landed in a farmer's field where I hid that evening in planning my evasion plans to get into the mountains. Unfortunately, somebody had notified the German authorities when I looked out in the evening that 4 soldiers with rifles had surrounded the house. And I was quite happy to give myself up to them because they were professional soldiers. They were called the Wehrmacht. The Wehrmacht and the Luftwaffe, which is the German Air Force, are honorable organizations. They are military organizations, have a long history. The dangerous people in Germany, of course, were the young people who were trained under the Nazi philosophy. And the worst of them were the Gestapo, which was a secret police, and Hitler's personal army, which was called the SS troops. The soldiers then took me to a hospital, and a little humor. It became New Year's Eve, and a Sergeant Schultz came up to me and said, "You're from Wisconsin, you would be in Milwaukee, and you'd be having a party on New Year's Eve." I says, "Yes, I probably would." So, with 10 other soldiers on New Year's Eve, they poured 2 glasses of champagne for me, and saluted and hoped for peace. So, I'm going to tell you some bad things about Germany, but there were good people in Germany too that were forced under the Nazi philosophy. The trip up into Germany, the interrogation center, and I eventually ended up at a prison camp in the northern part of Germany on the Baltic Sea. And you can see some of the memorabilia that I collected there after I was liberated by the Russian army on the 1st of May of 1945. And the war was over on 8th of May. I want to speak chiefly about what the war means and what it means to you. We should remember that there were many things bad that happened in Germany. You've heard about the Holocaust, the deaths of 6 million Jewish people just because Hitler decided that they caused the problems of Germany. We should also remember there were 6 million other people that were killed that Hitler decided was unfit to live in the new Reich, the new world that he was going to create. And these 6 million people included people who were different. He destroyed the homosexuals. He says that gypsies were evil, and he threw them in the concentration camps where they died. He said the Slovakian or Slovene people, which includes the Russians and the Polish, were unfit to live in the world. And they treated them in ruthless ways, and many of them died. But he even got to the point where he said the mentally retarded, the physically disabled, the elderly are a drag on the economy, and many of those people were even put to death, and they were Germans. Another event that got a great deal of publicity in our country, I would like to share with you because it has a lot to do with a middle school such as you have. I want to show you a picture of the middle school in Ledisi in Czechoslovakia. It so happened that you can pass it around. It so happened that the Nazi Gestapo general in Czechoslovakia was an evil, ruthless man, and he caused the deaths of many people in Czechoslovakia. You've heard the word partisans or underground. They were the resistance fighters. They killed this general whose name was Reinhard Heydrich. And because of the death of that man, Adolf Hitler ordered his Gestapo chief, whose name was Himmler, he sent him to Czechoslovakia. The orders from Hitler was to take all of the students, the girl students and the mothers, throw them in the concentration camp, and all the men were murdered, they were killed. He then destroyed every single building in this small town, about the size of Nekoosa, completely leveled it, he said, because he wanted to teach a lesson to the people of Europe that the Aryan race was going to rule. And this is an interesting little piece that came in our newspaper that shows a picture of Hitler giving an award to Himmler. And he says, for killing a few hundred because one of your butchers was shot. This really happened. And so it was obvious that this evil government that called themselves the Nazis, you could pass that around, son. It was necessary to eliminate them, and one of the reasons why we had to go for war. There were many other reasons too, but that is just one of them. And how it affected many of us young people. So that in the years 1941 and even before that, a man like Mr. Brost, America mobilized for war, and millions of young people like myself joined when we found out what was happening in the world. Did World War I and World War II solve a lot of problems? Well, they solved some temporary problems, but they didn't solve some of the problems that are still with us today. And these are problems of racial differences, ethnic differences, religious differences, which result in fears and hatreds, which we now see in the southeast part of Europe and the countries of Yugoslavia. And there, in this modern world, in spite of having a World War I and World War II to solve the problems of the world, we are looking at the possibility of another world war. And I would like to take just a few minutes to share a lovely little book with you, which I think a great deal of. And it's a book that's called I Dream of Peace. It was published a couple of years ago by UNICEF. You know what UNICEF is? It's United Nations Children's Fund. And in their helping of the Yugoslavian children, they have a plan, the teachers do, of trying to help the children understand war, and they go into the countries after the war 2 years ago. And it's a form of psychotherapy in trying to help these war-torn children of these countries. And I'd like to share just two stories which are appropriate for our group this morning. The painting and the little story is written by Danja, 14 years of age. And it shows the little girl painted her picture of lying on the ground in front of a church. And you can look at it afterwards. She's lying in front of a church and she's praying for peace. And the church has been hit by a bomb and is partially destroyed. And this is her therapeutic benefit of trying to understand war. Here's what she writes. It's all so strange. Suddenly it's so important. Everybody asking who you are, what you do, where you come from. So many people have been killed fighting for justice. But what justice? Do they know what they are fighting for, who they are fighting? And she's talking about her own people in this country. The weather is growing very cold now. No longer can you hear the singing of the birds. The sound, only the sound of children crying for a lost mother or father, a brother or sister. We are children without a country and without hope. One more. This is painted by a young boy named Roberto. And he painted a picture of what he would like to have in Yugoslavia. He painted a picture of flowers and beauty and a bird of peace. And here's what he wrote. If I were president, the tanks would be playhouses for the kids. Boxes of candy would fall from the sky. The mortars would fire balloons, and the guns would blossom with flowers. all the world's children would sleep in a peace unbroken by alerts or by shooting. The refugees could return to their village and we could start life anew. These are children the same age that you are. What I'm trying to say to you is that we should be thankful that we're living in a country like the United States of America. The land of free people, free nation, saved from all the wars of Europe. And we ask you to try to help strengthen democracy by respecting each other, whoever's sitting around you, regardless of what they look like, regardless how smart they are, we should respect each other. We should not be separated by racial problems or color problems or by social status. The strength of a democracy depends on unity. It depends on support. It depends on respect. Because we have the greatest form of government in the world, which is called a democracy with a constitution and a Bill of Rights, which gives us the equality and the right for freedom. And Abraham Lincoln said, we are a republic, which means a representative government of the people, by the people, and for the people, because we are the government. And when you give that pledge of allegiance to the flag, you are pledging to support your country, your school, friends around you, and your support will make a better democracy and a better world that perhaps someday will be free of hate and violence. We should never allow our country to become separated because of racial hatred that is happening in Yugoslavia. We should not let religious differences destroy our country. We do not want things like in Ireland, where the Catholics and the Protestants are fighting each other. We do not want a situation like in the Middle East, where Palestine and Israel cannot talk with each other. We do not want a country like Yugoslavia, where for 500 years they've had nothing but war because of differences in the people. Our veterans of foreign wars, my colleagues here, we thank you for listening. And we give you a special invitation, if you would, to join us on Memorial Day at our cemetery in Nekoosa. Your middle school band is going to be playing, and we'd like to see you there and help us give thanks for being the great United States of America. Thank you very much.
Students, do you have any questions of these gentlemen?
You're a good audience, anyhow.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the respect and the dignity that you showed toward these four gentlemen this morning. If you would like to hang around and look at some of the souvenirs that they brought back from World War II, you may. Hold it, just sit down and relax for another second. Mr. Thomas Gard, do any of these kids have study hall now? A few. Well, if you're interested, we need about 3 or 4 of you in the office for a while to help us if you're interested in staying down here. I don't want to sound corny, but in my life I have not honored, but I have respected some people more than others, where you kind of put them on a pedestal and make them into heroes. Usually in my life it's been my family, my parents. I consider my parents my heroes. But besides that, I have also had respect shown towards athletes. I've always thought a lot about outstanding athletes, you know, from my era, the Bart Starrs and Jim Rinkos and people like that. But I would like to tell these four gentlemen this morning, I probably should have said it on Tuesday, they're now on that pedestal that I've had athletes for the last several years and my parents. They're now four of my heroes. What they went through, what they did to provide us, you, me, the lifestyle that we have today, I will never forget. And I will always be in their debt. I will always appreciate what they did for me and for you. Gentlemen, you're our heroes. Thank you. They come up here and look at some of their things.